August 29, 2005, New Orleans, Louisiana, 8:14 in the morning. The water that broke through the industrial canal wall did not announce itself with a roar. It came in silence, a dark, cold mass climbing up door frames, filling narrow hallways, lifting heavy furniture off wooden floors. It did not splash, it simply rose. Within 20 minutes, the lower Ninth Ward was submerged. By noon, 80% of the city was underwater. 1,800 people would not survive the week. But Hurricane Katrina did not do this. A decision made in an air-conditioned conference room, years before the storm, did. New Orleans does not sit beside the water, it sits inside it. Geographically, the city is a topographic anomaly. It is wedged between the winding Mississippi River to the south and the vast expanse of Lake Pontchartrain to the north. But the defining feature of New Orleans is its elevation. The city rests an average of 1 to 3 meters below sea level. Neighborhoods like the lower Ninth Ward and Lakeview sit at the very bottom of this depression. Imagine a cereal bowl placed on a table, completely surrounded by a deep lake. The levees are the rim of that bowl. They are the only barrier standing between 480,000 residents, and the water pressing relentlessly against every side. Lower the rim by just a few feet and the bowl fills. To keep the city dry, a sprawling 350-mile network of levees, floodwalls, and pumps was constructed. The United States Army Corps of Engineers, the USACE, was tasked with designing and maintaining this system. It was considered one of the greatest civil engineering marvels in the country, or at least it was supposed to be. Before August 2005, New Orleans was a city defined by its rhythm. It carried the sound of brass bands bleeding out of the open doors on Bourbon Street. It smelled of powdered sugar on warm beignets and chicory coffee from Café du Monde. The air was thick, humid, and heavy with history. Of its nearly 500,000 residents, approximately 100,000 did not own a car. Many were elderly, disabled, or living below the poverty line. Shelton Alexander was one of them. He lived in the city, relied on public transit, and did not have the means to buy a bus ticket to Houston. When a mandatory evacuation order was eventually issued, residents like Alexander had no real choice. Their only option was the city's designated shelter of last resort, the Louisiana Superdome. But the true failure was not just in the evacuation plan. It was buried deep underground. The levees protecting New Orleans were officially designed to withstand a Category 3 hurricane. The structural backbone of these floodwalls relied on steel sheet piles, massive metal plates driven vertically into the soil beneath the concrete walls. The depth of these steel sheets is what prevents the immense hydrostatic pressure of rising floodwaters from pushing the soil out from underneath the wall. When the Army Corps of Engineers designed the floodwalls for the Industrial Canal, they relied on soil survey data from the 1970s. The data was 30 years out of date. It did not account for how the marshy, peaty soil had degraded and settled over time. Independent engineering analyses conducted after the disaster revealed a fatal compromise. Calculations indicated that the sheet piles needed to be driven at least 17 feet into the ground to remain stable. But deeper steel costs more money. To reduce project costs, the final design shortened the sheet piles to just 10 feet. The engineers saved money. The steel was cut short, 3 feet here, 7 feet there, and 1,800 lives. What makes this engineering compromise unforgivable is that the government knew exactly what would happen if those floodwalls failed. They did not have to guess. They already had the data. In July 2004, 1 year before Katrina, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, partnered with state officials and Louisiana State University to conduct a comprehensive disaster training exercise. They called it Hurricane Pam. The scenario was specific. A slow-moving Category 3 hurricane making direct landfall near New Orleans. They ran the simulation. The results were catastrophic. The models predicted that the levees would overtop and fail. They predicted that up to 300,000 residents would be trapped and require immediate rescue. The report concluded that the levee system needed urgent funding to be upgraded to Category 5 standards. It proposed an immediate budget of $105 million for hurricane protection. Instead, in early 2005, the federal budget for New Orleans levee construction was slashed to $40 million. Funding was prioritized elsewhere, including the war in Iraq. No emergency upgrades were authorized. The Hurricane Pam report was filed away in a drawer. Then, on August 26, 2005, a real Category 3 storm entered the Gulf of Mexico. The timeline was merciless. By August 27th, Mayor Ray Nagin issued the first mandatory evacuation order in the city's history. But an order is merely ink on paper without a mechanism to enforce it. The city did not dispatch buses. It did not provide train tickets. It offered no transport plan for the 100,000 residents who did not own a vehicle. At 10:11 a.m. on August 28th, the National Weather Service issued a warning unprecedented in its sheer linguistic terror. It stated, "Human suffering incredible by modern standards will occur. Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks, perhaps longer." That evening, 35,000 people crowded into the Superdome. Shelton Alexander sat on the concrete floor, listening to the wind tear at the stadium's composite roof. At 5 a.m. the next morning, the power grids failed. The stadium plunged into complete darkness. A loud crack echoed through the cavernous space as the wind ripped 2 holes in the roof. Rain poured in. And then, an agonizing silence settled over the dome. Outside, thousands more remained in their homes. Not because they were stubborn, not because they ignored the warnings. If you lived in the lower Ninth Ward, did not own a car, and had $47 in your bank account, and the mayor told you to leave but offered no way out, what would you have done? I genuinely want you to think about that, because the answer tells you everything about who ultimately paid the price for this systemic failure. At 6:10 a.m. on August 29th, Katrina made its final landfall in Plaquemines Parish. The hurricane pushed a massive wall of water, known as a storm surge, from Lake Pontchartrain into the city's internal canal system. The turning point was 8:14 a.m. At the industrial canal bordering the lower Ninth Ward, the water did not overtop the concrete floodwalls. It did not need to. The water pressed against the concrete. The immense hydrostatic pressure transferred down to the steel sheet piles buried in the peat. Because the steel had been cut to 10 feet instead of 17, it could not anchor the wall. The soil gave way. The steel piles were pushed laterally out of the mud. The concrete wall collapsed. The water did not spill in. It breached. It came from below, bubbling up through the floorboards before blowing the doors off their hinges. It acted like a living entity. It lifted refrigerators, spun sofas across living rooms, and pinned beds against ceilings. Within 20 minutes, the entire first floor of the lower Ninth Ward was erased. Within an hour, roofs were the only ground left. By 10 a.m., 80% of the city was submerged. 80%, that is not a flood. That is a city becoming a lake and a lake becoming a grave. For those trapped, survival meant climbing. Those without axes or hammers drowned in their own attics as the water rose to the rafters. Those who managed to smash through their roofs climbed out into the relentless rain and painted help using whatever debris they could find. One man, unnamed in the official reports but forever etched in the visual history of the disaster, sat on his roof for hours. He later recounted seeing 7 different helicopters fly directly overhead. He took off his shirt. He waved it frantically. He screamed until his throat bled. The helicopters flew past. He waited on that roof for another 3.5 days. In a city rapidly drowning, the only safe havens were unintentional ones. New Orleans is famous for its above-ground cemeteries, built because the soil is too swampy to bury the dead. As the water swallowed the streets, residents swam to these cemeteries. They climbed onto the raised marble tombs. They lay on the cold stone, surrounded by a sea of black, toxic water. The dead had become the only shelter for the living. The other irony was architectural. Post-disaster analyses by UC Berkeley engineers revealed that houses built on traditional pier foundations, raised just 2 or 3 feet off the ground on wooden posts, had a drastically higher survival rate. People lived not because they were smarter or richer, but because a carpenter decades ago chose a specific type of foundation. They ran the simulation. It had told them exactly which neighborhoods would flood first. It had told them exactly how fast the water would rise. The lower Ninth Ward was at the top of that list. They knew, inside the Superdome, 35,000 people were trapped in a structure designed for football, not survival. The air conditioning was dead. The temperature inside the stadium climbed to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The plumbing failed by the second day. The smell of human waste, sweat, and despair became a physical weight in the air. Shelton Alexander realized no one was coming. He stopped looking at the doors. According to oral histories recorded by Loyola University, Alexander began organizing those around him. He helped the elderly navigate the pitch-black corridors to find the overflowing bathrooms. He found water for children. He sat in the dark and sang with groups of praying strangers. He later said, "At some point you stop waiting for someone to save you, and you start trying to save the people next to you." While Alexander navigated the darkness of the dome, the director of FEMA, Michael Brown, was navigating something else. In the middle of the disaster, Brown sent an internal email to an aide. He was not asking for rescue helicopters. He was asking for recommendations on a good restaurant for dinner in Baton Rouge. When the water finally receded, it left behind a profound and toxic silence. The official death toll, updated by the National Hurricane Center in 2023, stands at 1,392 people. More than 1 million people were displaced. The estimated financial damage reached $125 billion. At the time, it was the costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States. But as the mud dried, the investigations began, and they all pointed to the same conclusion. Within a year, 4 independent investigations, including those by UC Berkeley, the American Society of Civil Engineers, and the National Academy of Sciences, reached a consensus. The levee system did not fail because the storm was unprecedented. It failed because the design was fundamentally flawed. In June 2006, Lieutenant General Carl Strock of the Army Corps of Engineers stood before the press and admitted, "We made mistakes. I accept that responsibility." But responsibility is not accountability. In 2008, a federal judge concluded that the Army Corps was negligent and derelict in its duty. However, the judge was forced to dismiss the massive class action lawsuit against the government. A single piece of legislation, the Flood Control Act of 1928, granted the federal government absolute immunity from liability involving flood control projects. No one went to prison. No individual faced personal financial penalties. The city itself never fully recovered. Today, nearly 2 decades later, New Orleans still has roughly 80,000 fewer residents than it did before 2005. In the lower Ninth Ward, many neighborhoods were never completely rebuilt. Empty plots overgrown with weeds sit between isolated houses. Thousands of families never returned, not because they did not want to, but because there was nothing left to return to. When investigators combed through the archives trying to understand how the system had failed so spectacularly, they found the Hurricane Pam report. They ran the simulation. The results were accurate to within a margin of error, and the budget was cut anyway. On September 1st, 3.5 days after the power failed, the evacuation buses finally arrived at the Superdome. Shelton Alexander walked out into the daylight. He breathed in the fresh air. He turned around, looked at the massive structure he had barely survived, and then stopped to help an elderly woman onto a bus. After that day, Shelton Alexander never returned to New Orleans. What he lost in those 3.5 days was not just his home, his possessions, or his city. He lost the certainty that the systems built to protect him were actually designed to do that. Nature brought Hurricane Katrina to the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. The laws of physics dictated the barometric pressure, the wind speed, and the volume of the storm surge. But physics did not decide that the floodwalls would fail. Nature did not dictate that 100,000 people, stripped of any means to evacuate, would have to choose between a drowning attic and the Superdome. And nature certainly did not lock the Hurricane Pam report inside a desk drawer. Someone cut $65 million from the levee upgrade budget. Someone approved a sheet pile design using soil data that was 30 years out of date. Someone read the exact simulation of the disaster, saw the catastrophic casualty projections, and decided that saving money was worth the risk. Those people were not on the roofs of the lower Ninth Ward holding up painted signs. They were not suffocating in the heat of the Superdome. They were eating dinner in air-conditioned restaurants in Baton Rouge and Washington, D.C. They ran the simulation. They read the results. They cut the budget anyway. 1,392 people. Hurricane Katrina did not destroy New Orleans. A decision made in an air-conditioned conference room to shorten a steel pole by 3 feet to save money. Did. If you made it this far, thank you. These stories take a long time to research, structure, and verify, and they are rarely easy to tell. But I believe the people of New Orleans deserve to have their story told accurately. Not just as a hurricane story, but as a story about what happens when the systems we trust fail the people they were built to protect. If this kind of research matters to you, consider subscribing. Until next time, this is the Disaster Archives.